Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. I'm Henry Bonsu. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a television and radio broadcaster from the UK and Ghana. Delighted to be your moderator for this session. Hopefully you're in the right place. If you came here for sustainable forests and green energy, that's good. If you came here specifically for sustainable bioenergy, for energy transition toward net zero emissions, even better. Fantastic. Because that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to discuss over the next hour and a half or thereabouts. So thank you very much. We'll have speakers in the room and joining us virtually as well. The key subject of this special event, well, it's twofold really. How sustainable forest management and sustainable bioenergy production may contribute to green energy transition towards sustainable energy for all. How are we going to do this? It's a laudable aim, but how are we going to realize it? That's part one. Part two is this question. I mean, what are the implications of the energy transition towards net zero for the forestry sector? Another key question. Because let's think about it, energy, and we're talking about it a lot more these days because of what's happening in Ukraine and elsewhere. It lies at the heart of both the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and, of course, the Paris Agreement of 2015. People talk a lot about biomass, don't they, from forests and agriculture. And these sources contribute a significant proportion or portion to the global energy mix. Wood fuel, for example, accounts for roughly 40% of the world's renewable energy supply. And think about that compared to solar, hydroelectric, and wind power. It's as much as all three of those combined. However, much of this bioenergy is used for what? Ordinary, everyday, mundane things like cooking and heating, essentials in the context particularly of developing countries where access to modern energy is still lacking because of slow progress toward universal access. A lot of people are cut out of electricity and clean cooking solutions. So that heavy reliance has significant environmental, economic, and social implications. I'm not going to name any city or town in any particular country, but as I suppose most of you are well-traveled, you know exactly what hits you when you go to some places, and a lot of it is from that use of firewood and charcoal. So within this context, I am pleased to moderate this session on sustainable forests and green energy. We're going towards net zero emissions. And so we've got the speakers and panelists who are going to share their visions and insights on the subject. We were due to have Ms. Tina Vahanen of the FAO to open the session. She's not here, but I'm delighted to invite Ms. Thais Linares-Juvenal, Senior Forestry Officer and Team Leader of the Sustainable Forest Value Chain Innovation and Investments. Thais is going to open, and then we will hear another keynote from Francesco Lacambra, who's the Director General of IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. He will join us via recorded video. And then we'll have our panelists. We've got 4 of them joining us virtually and 1 joining us here in the studio. And they've come from a range of disciplines, from the IEA, Bioenergy Task 45, from FAO, from the Forestry Agency of Japan, and from the African Union, and also from the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry. So from a range of disciplines. But I'm delighted to say that Thais Linares-Juvenal from FAO is going to get us going. Over to you. And please be generous in your applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Excellence, distinguished speakers, dear participants, it's my great pleasure to open this special event co-organized by FAO, the Global Bioenergy Partnership, and the International Renewable Energy Agency in the context of the 15th World Forest Congress. Sustainable and clean energy solutions play a crucial role in ending poverty and hunger. Energy is needed at every stage of agri-food systems, and it's integral to supporting sustainable food system transformation. It therefore plays a key role in the implementation of FAO's strategic framework, which aims at achieving better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and better life for all. Sustainable and renewable energy stimulates innovation, generates green jobs, and improves vital services such as better food systems, healthcare, and education, while also contributing to the net zero emissions. For all these reasons, FAO has developed its Energy Smart Food Program, which aims to ensure adequate energy access in agro-food systems through more energy efficiency, use of renewable energy, including sustainable bioenergy, and a water energy food nexus approach. Sustainable bioenergy is recognized as an integral component of a low-carbon global energy system and contributes to achieving not only the net zero targets, but also universal energy access. 1/3 of the global population, about 2.6 billion people, currently rely on traditional use of bioenergy, such as wood, charcoal, and agricultural residues for household cooking and boiling of drinking water. In Africa, where this reliance on wood fuel is the highest compared to any other regions, about 2/3 of the households use wood for cooking, and about 90% of all wood cut is burned for this purpose. Such a heavy reliance and large consumption have significant environmental, economic, and social implications. It makes universal access to modern energy service by 2030 a big challenge and calls for bold action. Focusing on sustainability is key to ensure that bioenergy makes a positive contribution to sustainable development, while also contributing to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. Extra efforts are needed to facilitate the gradual transition towards modern, renewable, and sustainable sources of energy. More efficient wood energy supply chains and the adoption of the alternative forms of modern energy, bioenergy play an important role in this process. FAO is a founding partner and host of the Global Bioenergy Partnership, a unique forum to promote sustainable bioenergy. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we need a stronger collaboration between UN agencies and other partners, including the private sector, to foster a stronger linkage between the provision of energy, in particular bioenergy and food production, to achieve the SDGs and net zero growth, leaving no one behind. To this end, FAO has recently joined forces with IRENA through a memorandum of understanding aiming to implement concrete actions that ensure both energy and food security. Today's joint event by FAO, IRENA, and GBEP is a concrete example of collaborative efforts across the forestry and energy communities to explore debate and enhance the implementation of sustainable bioenergy and its links to sustainable forest management. I wish you a very successful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Thais. It's really good to hear about this memorandum of understanding between FAO and IRENA. They have a lot of experience in this area, and I'm delighted to say that they're led by a Director General who has personal experience, 30 years or more in fields of climate sustainability and international cooperation. His name is Francesco La Camera, the Director General of IRENA, so the other half of the partnership with FAO, and he's talked previously about the need for a systemic approach combining new tech, AI, and new business models, as well as intelligent development of policy. So how does that work together? I'm delighted to invite him to give us his keynote speech via video. Please run the VT of Francesco La Camera, the Director General of IRENA.
Dear Deputy Director General Semedo, dear friends, distinguished guests, greetings from the International Renewable Energy Agency. We are delighted to partner on today's event, Sustainable Forest and Green Energy, with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the Global Bioenergy Partnership. It's my great pleasure to join you all virtually and share insight from IRENA's World Energy Transition Outlook. We launched it recently during the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. The World Energy Transition Outlook and the IRENA's specific work on bioenergy highlight the crucial role of sustainable biomass in delivering the Paris Agreement 1.5 degrees goal. High fossil fuel prices, energy security concerns, and the urgency of climate change are reminders of the cost for economies dependent on fossil fuels. Those compounding crises underscore the pressing need to accelerate the global energy transition. Speaking of energy security, 80% of the global population lives in countries that are net importers of fossil fuels. By contrast, renewables are available in all countries, offering a way out of import dependency and allows countries to decouple their economies from the cost of fossil fuels. Bioenergy is a widely available renewable option and can play a significant role in the decarbonization of all sectors. The forestry sector is crucial for bioenergy to realize its role in a sustainable way. IRENA's World Energy Transition Outlook 2022 considers electrification and energy efficiency to be the main decarbonization drivers, enabled by renewables, green hydrogen, and sustainable biomass. These technologies can shape the avenue to lead out of the crisis toward a decarbonized energy system. However, while renewable electricity is the cheapest power option around the world, dominating new energy addition year on year, the energy transition is far from being on track. Recent years have seen many positive developments. Renewable power capacity additions and energy transition investment have reached new heights, while costs have continued to come down. Energy efficiency investments have increased, and energy intensity has improved. Furthermore, end-use electrification, especially through the sale of electric vehicles, has accelerated. And the even more popular green hydrogen has become a major topic for energy policymakers, with new strategies and policies under development in many countries. Finally, bioenergy consumption has also increased. However, despite these positive developments, the pace of change is still not enough. Achieving the 2050 climate targets depends on sufficient action by 2030. Anything short of radical and immediate action will diminish and may eliminate the chance of staying on the 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees path. This is what we are repeating everywhere. The coming 8 years will be critical. IRENA has identified priority action. Some of these include a resolute replacement of coal with renewables. The pace of renewables power deployment must triple, 3 times more annual addition of renewable power by 2030 is what we need. The efficient use of energy across all sectors must increase through innovation and demand-side management. Finally, the decarbonization of end-use sectors through electrification, green hydrogen, and the direct use of renewables with a key role for sustainable bioenergy should be prioritized. With a holistic policy framework, serious investment, and international cooperation, the energy transition can be a means for job creation and economic growth. 85 million energy transition-related jobs can be created worldwide in renewables and other transition-related technologies between today and 2030, more than offsetting the 12 million jobs lost. Of course, the imperative of just transition remains, which has to be carefully managed to minimize risk in pursuit of a more inclusive and equal world. Modern bioenergy plays a key role in the energy transition compatible with meeting the 1.5-degree climate goal. It has contributed to the largest share of all direct use of renewables, providing 80% of energy demand for building and industry, 3% of transport energy needs, and 3% of electricity generation. Biomass-based feedstock also provides a fraction of the feedstocks for chemical and plastical production. Moreover, universal energy access requires replacing traditional biomass use with modern and clean energy technologies. The role of bioenergy is greatly strengthened in the energy transition. According to our scenario, the 1.5-degree scenario, by 2050, modern bioenergy will provide 70% of all final energy consumption, thus contributing to power generation and all end-use sectors, especially enabling emissions reduction in sectors with few other renewable options, such as aviation and chemical industry. The use of biomass coupled with carbon capture and storage in the power and other industrial sectors will be critical in achieving negative emissions and the net zero goal. In the building sector, our 1.5-degree scenario envisages massive reduction in the inefficient use of biomass for cooking and heating. This energy needs to be replaced by a range of other sources aiming to shift to more sustainable, renewable solutions. The modern use of biomass in buildings will increase threefold, rising to 18.2 exajoule by 2050. There will be strong expansion in district heat from biomass, biogas, and biomethane. In the industry sector, bioenergy is seeing strong growth in the chemical sector, one of the most energy and carbon-intensive sectors, for which other decarbonization options are limited. Bioenergy can provide both process energy and feedstock for chemical production, replacing fossil fuel-based feedstock. In 2050, bio-based plastics could contribute to 20% of total plastic production, rising from less than 1% today. Bioenergy is currently the second largest contributor to renewable energy jobs, with just over 3.5 million jobs. This could increase to 14 million jobs by 2050. The liquid biofuel sector provides more than 60% of all bioenergy jobs today, followed by solid biomass and biogas supply chains. The supply of biomass feedstock will need to expand to meet the energy transition needs. Global and regional estimates suggests that biomass could reach the needed resource levels through a prudent and sustainable expansion, coupled with strong evidence-based sustainability governance procedures and regulation. In the forestry sector, wood processing residue, forestry residue, and agri-forestry practice are key to supporting the expansion of biomass sources sustainably. Realizing the feedstock potential also requires accelerating afforestation of degraded lands with native trees and sharing best practice for sustainable forest management. A policy framework must be in place to ensure sustainability and minimize adverse outcomes, such as competition for land, emission caused by land use change, deforestation, biodiversity loss, as well as air pollution. It should consist of stable and long-term sustainability targets, coordinated planning across departments, including energy, forestry, and others, as well as regulation and certification schemes. The Sustainable Development Goals can also be used to support sustainability governance. Naturally, no more solution fits all. Policies and measures should be contextualized when based on engagement with various stakeholders. In this last regard, ARENA will publish a new report on the policy framework for bioenergy just at the end of May. ARENA has also conducted various studies to support sustainable bioenergy policy making in different regions, such as Southeast Asia. There is an abundance of untapped bioenergy in Southeast Asia. ARENA estimates that in 2050, bioenergy could contribute to 40% of the primary energy supply in this region. We have identified 13 sustainable pathways that will enable bioenergy to compete economically with fossil fuels. These include forestry residue that can be used for industrial heat generation and combined heat and power generation. The global energy transition requires a 90% emission reduction in the aviation sector by 2050, compared to the business as usual level. Biofuels can play an important role in the decarbonization of aviation, where few other low-carbon options are available. Boosting biojet fuel production requires the use of various feedstock types, such as forestry products and agricultural residue. However, policies are urgently needed to overcome barriers to reduce the high cost of biojet fuels and accelerate technology development and commercialization. Renewable energy solutions and integrated food energy systems represent a crucial opportunity to meet the energy needs in the agriculture sector. In 2021, ARENA's and FAO joint report on renewable energy for agri-food systems was launched at COP26 in Glasgow. This report presents evidence of the benefits of various renewable energy applications, including renewable-based water pumping, processing, cold storage, and sustainable bioenergy. ARENA and FAO have committed through a memorandum of understanding and a joint energy compact to work together to accelerate the adoption of renewables in the agriculture sector through energy assessment, pilot programs, and strengthening the enabling environment at national level. So, distinguished guests, accelerating the energy transition is an urgent and daunting task. It will require far-sighted choices, discipline, and wise investments. Governments today shoulder the challenging task of tackling energy security, resilience, and affordable energy for all. As I have presented today, bioenergy is among the key options for achieving these targets. However, sustainable bioenergy development must integrate and coordinate with the forestry sector, not only to minimize the potential sustainability risks, but also to tap the synergies and benefit to both sectors. Achieving this will require radical action and extraordinary levels of international cooperation. IRENA is looking forward to further collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the Global Bioenergy Partnership to help ensure bioenergy can achieve its role in the energy transition in a sustainable way. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow. Again, not for the first time, I felt like I was back at college there, in grad school, just working away and making sure I got the key points there. Some amazing information there. 80% of the world's population live in countries that are net importers of fossil fuels. But I mean, renewables are available in all countries. And they're the cheapest form of energy available. We're far from being on track when it comes to this just transition that we all want to see. But they've identified 13 sustainable pathways. I mean, look at biojet fuel. There's so many things that are possible. But as Francesco Lacamera said, the policy framework must be in place to ensure sustainability. The question is it in place? So in this next session, for this next hour, and we'll save some time later on in this part of the session for your questions, your thoughts, your comments, your replies, even small statements. We're going to look at various aspects of this, including the links between sustainable forestry management and sustainable bioenergy as a contribution to climate action, sustainable production and the use of wood energy with forest landscape restoration and sustainable livelihoods, policies and strategies on modern use of wood energy, the case of industrialized countries, case study Japan, transitioning toward modern or more modern and sustainable use of wood biomass in Africa. We'll hear from the African Union there. And also the case of charcoal, key concerns and the strategic transition of the wood fuel sector in developing countries. And we'll get an overall perspective on this from Thais. I'm going to ask her to come forward as well. So we've got several panelists. 2 of them are in the room, and I believe 4 of them are going to be joining us virtually. So let's get our 2 live human beings back up here on stage. Thais, I'm going to welcome you to sit here. And I'm also going to ask Posiso Sola, who is a scientist at the Natural Resources Governance and Bioenergy Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry, to come up here. Posiso, please come up, both of you, and join me on this platform. And then, by the wonders of modern technology, we hope any moment now to see Annette Cowie, Senior Principal Research Scientist at the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, Australia. Maria Michaela Moresi, Executive Secretary, Global Bioenergy Partnership, and Natural Resources Officer at FAO. Toshimasa Masuyama, Advisor on Forests and Climate at the Forestry Agency at the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, Japan. Yaguba Traore, Head of Policy, Strategy and Support, the African Energy Commission of the African Union. So that's, did you see them? Did they appear? By the wonders of technology, let them appear. And very good. Now, is that Annette or Maria, or is it Annette? Fantastic. All right, good. Now, I'm glad you're there, Annette, smiling with that lovely green background. You got the memo, that's good. Let's start off with you, Annette. because we want to get from you, there's all four of them. Just wave your right hand, to show that you can hear us. Signs of life, please, signs of life. Wave your right hand. Okay, not everybody got the memo, but don't worry, I believe you're still breathing and you're human beings there, good. We're going to start off with Annette. An overview of the links between sustainable forestry management and sustainable bioenergy as a contribution to climate action. How do you see this? Just can you give us a brief assessment of the overview of those links, please?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. I have a few slides that I would like to use to tell you my thoughts on this important topic. And I'm hoping that you can now see my presentation in the correct mode, and please yell if there's any problem. I'm seeing Michelle nodding, so I'm hoping that everything's going well.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you, Annette. Please go on.
Thank you. So I'm from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries in the state of New South Wales, Australia. I'm actually in a different state today, but I'm in Adelaide. So I'm going to reinforce several points that have already been made by Francesco. So you won't really be hearing anything very new from me. But let's talk first about the goal of the Paris Agreement, which is, of course, to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees and preferably no more than 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. And as the Paris Agreement explains, this will require the world reaching the condition of net zero greenhouse gas emissions before the end of the century. So in the second half of the century, we need to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions. We need to reach net zero CO2 earlier. In order to meet a 1.5 degree target, we need to reach net zero in the early 2050s. And to limit global warming to 2 degrees, we need to reach net zero in the 2070s. This is information that came from the IPCC's sixth assessment report, the Working Group 3 report, which was released just a couple of weeks ago. And this position of net zero means that we are balancing emissions of all sources of all greenhouse gases by carbon sequestration, and forestry and bioenergy can contribute to this goal on both sides of the balance. This is an illustration that comes from chapter 12, in fact, of that report that I just mentioned from the IPCC, and it illustrates the ways that forestry can contribute. Of course, when we plant trees, when they grow, they take CO2 from the atmosphere and they store it in their biomass. If we harvest those trees and we use the biomass for wood products, they continue to store carbon and can displace more greenhouse gas intensive building materials. If we use the biomass that's spare for bioenergy, then we can displace fossil fuels, again reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And if we capture the CO2 from a power station and we store it geologically, so that's BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, then we not only create renewable energy, displacing fossil fuel emissions, but we also continue to store the carbon. So that's a carbon dioxide removal method. I'm sure you're familiar with these. We've heard about them already today. But one that perhaps you don't hear so much about is biochar. Biochar means taking biomass from any source and heating it in a low oxygen environments where you release syngases, which can be used for renewable energy, but you also create a very stable carbon product, the biochar, which you can use as a soil amendment. And when you do that, the carbon continues to be stored. The biochar in soil would last for hundreds to thousands of years. And also it can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the soil. So it can reduce nitrous oxide emissions, nitrous oxide being a very powerful greenhouse gas, nearly 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So these are all ways that forestry, sustainable forest management, can contribute to climate change mitigation. And I know there are a lot of words on this slide, but I'd like to draw your attention to these very important statements that have been made by the IPCC. So the top illustration comes from the IPCC's Climate and Land Report, which shows how sustainable forest management can contribute to reversing land degradation, and it contributes a carbon sink. Now, the two definitions below, well, or the two statements below. First is the definition of sustainable forest management, which comes from the same report, which emphasises that sustainable forest management is about maintaining the functions of the forest in terms of biodiversity and productivity and regeneration capacity, so that it can meet multiple objectives. It doesn't necessarily create maximum carbon stock in the forest, but it maximises the carbon sink for beneficial uses. And that's emphasised in the lower statement, which talks about the fact that sustainable forest management, so that's forest management that produces a sustained yield of forest products, so timber plus biomass for bioenergy, will give the greatest mitigation benefit. So that's compared with a forest that's unharvested and managed for carbon sequestration alone. So in conclusion, I would say that our challenge is to integrate sustainable forest management into our landscapes, our multifunctional landscapes that need to provide for conservation, for settlements and for food production, as well as timber production and biomass for bioenergy. So this is our challenge, as has already been mentioned, of doing this sustainably, because we want to provide human needs while maintaining the natural resource base and ecosystem functions. Thank you very much.
Annette, thank you very much indeed for that. Yes, indeed. Sustainable forest management can maintain functions of the forest so that it can meet objectives. It can maximize carbon sink and generate the greatest mitigation benefit than just leaving the forest, just fallow, just letting it grow naturally. If you manage it well, you can do a lot more. Fantastic. Okay, so let's move on to Maria Michela Moresi. You're going to talk to us about sustainable production and the use of wood energy. So you're going to link sustainable production and the use of wood energy with forest landscape restoration and sustainable livelihoods. Quite a number of elements to get in there, but I know that you're going to hold our energy and teach us something. Maria Michela Moresi from FAO, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all participants online and there in person during the conference. I have some slides that I would like technicians to put up on the screen. All right, perfect. Okay.
Okay, Maria,
all right.
Are you happy with that slide, Maria, the one you're seeing at the moment?
Absolutely, now I see them. Good. Thank you so much. So as you said, I would like to very much highlight the linkages between the importance of sustainability, of sustainable production and use of wood energy with forest landscape restoration, sustainable livelihood. So next, please. First of all, I would like to highlight the difference between between traditional and modern bioenergy. We've heard in all previous presentations by keynote speakers the difference between those two ways of using bioenergy. So traditional bioenergy from solid biomass, we've heard, is the only energy available for around 2.6 billion people, especially in developing countries. But the problem that we have here is that it is not produced and used in a sustainable manner. On the other side, we have modern bioenergy that offers efficient and sustainable opportunities to improve or replace traditional wood energy value chains. And in this case, it also contributes to forest landscape restoration. So the key aspect here is sustainability. Sustainability is key in order to guarantee a transition from traditional towards more modern bioenergy production and use. Next one, please. To do this in the context of the Global Bioenergy Partnership, that is an international initiative that has been collaborating with FAO and IRENA in the organization of this important session of the World Forestry Congress. In the context of the Global Bioenergy Partnership, which is based in FAO headquarters in Rome, we have agreed amongst all the GBEP members, there are more than 80 up of today, as of today, we have agreed a set of 24 sustainability indicators that are subdivided under the 3 pillars of sustainable development: environmental, social, and economic, with the objective to monitor the impact of bioenergy production, transformation, and use, so through the whole value chain, in terms of environmental, social, and economic aspects. Why we've done this? Why this set of indicators is so important? Because the data that we get from the measurement of these indicators on a specific bioenergy value chain is extremely important for policymakers in order for them to take informed decisions towards a more sustainable bioenergy value chain at the national level. We have measured those indicators in several countries. Please go ahead, next slide. Now, how do we transition from traditional towards more modern production and use of bioenergy? Through a number of actions, direct and indirect activities, actions, approach. Next one, please. Let's start with the direct approach. So it's important that we improve the efficiency and the sustainability of energy value chains through direct approach, through each of the stages of bioenergy, of the bioenergy value chain, from the production, transformation, then the final use, without forgetting also the byproducts that comes out from the whole process and that could be used to produce additional bioenergy production, or that could be used to restore the land. And this is the case of biochar, for example. But at the same time, together with direct activities, direct approach, we could also intervene with indirect approach. Next slide, please. So direct and indirect could go together. And indirect approach, we mean to look at alternatives to reduce, for example, the pressure on the forest, on forest resources. For example, looking at alternative feedstocks, that's the case of food and crop waste, crop residues, sewage. Look at new technologies, and that's the case of gasification. Here again, the production of biochar, which is put back into the soil to restore the nutrients into the soil. Or to look at other alternatives in terms of bioenergy pathways. And that's the case of biogas, for example, and the use of digestate from biogas into the soil to restore the soil. So you see these kind of direct and indirect activities, approaches, interventions could not only support and restore the land and forest landscape restoration, but also intervene in other sectors like poverty reduction, climate change mitigation and adaptation, disaster risk reduction, waste management, and so on. Next one, please. To conclude, it is also important not to forget to look at bioenergy and at forestry, not in isolation. We have to consider bioenergy and forestry in the context of the wider bioeconomy. And this was mentioned also by the keynote speaker, the DG Francesco La Camera, in his speech. It's important to consider that interventions should be carried out as part of an integrated landscape approach, also mentioned by Annette, that take into account these competing resource demands and needs from all stakeholders. Next one, please, just to say thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you very much for that very, very illuminating presentation. There's one particular line that kind of hung pregnantly in my mind. Urgent but gradual transition from traditional to modern. We can do this directly or indirectly. And that leads me to the panelist on my far left, Forestry Solar. a scientist at the Natural Resources Governance and Bioenergy Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry. The reason, Posiso, why I'm coming to you is because you may have concerns. You may indeed. Concerns about the strategic transition of the wood fuel sector in developing countries. And you may want to home in on an example, a case study, like charcoal in Africa. I suggest that's what you want to talk about. Is it?
Yeah. Is this on?
Yes, it is on.
Okay.
So please, yes, tell us about your concerns, given what we've heard so far.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have 4 slides, PowerPoint that I would like to show, just to tell our story at C4ECRAF on the journey that we have walked in the past 5 years in Cameroon, in Congo, DR, in Zambia, Kenya, and also the neighboring countries like Uganda, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and Chad. And this is really the story that I'd like to share. Next slide, please. Next slide. Why are we so concerned about wood fuel? Why are we so concerned about charcoal when the idea is to transition from those traditional, dirty, and unmodern wood fuel sources? The issue is in sub-Saharan Africa, there is no food security without energy security. So those making food security policies, please consider energy security as part of your food security policies. We cook our food, but I think there are very few people who eat salads. I think most of the food is actually dried as part of preservation, and therefore it's also boiled in order for us to prepare meals. So it's really, for you to boil, you take more energy to actually boil dry foods. And it remains really the main source of energy, and charcoal is the main wood fuel product that is used in the urban centers for cooking and also heating. It is available, it is affordable, and it's preferred. The aroma for that food is nice, so it's preferred. And it's very versatile in terms of the meal size that you want to cook. If it's a big pot, a small pot, and so on. So it's versatile and very contextual in most circumstances. Just looking at the statistics from Kenya in 2019, you'll find that now there isn't much difference between urban and rural in terms of preference of charcoal. 46%, 42% is more or less the same. And then you see the amount of charcoal that is being consumed by household as well is not very different in urban or rural, as much as even if you have a small proportion of households that are using firewood in the urban centers, the amount of firewood they use on average is almost the same as that is being used in the rural areas. So this really remains important. And then a study, I think, is yet to be published by colleagues at FAO and then the University of Massachusetts. I think you'll find that really the dependency on wood fuel or the lack of access to clean modern cooking is a real concern in sub-Saharan Africa. And therefore, it's urgent. This transition to more modern energy sources remains urgent, but this is where we are starting. Next slide, please. And the interesting thing is that millions of tons of charcoal are crossing borders as local supplies dwindle in many countries. And these local supplies sometimes are not a physical reduction, they are because of policies. You find that most African countries have outlawed commercial or large-scale production of charcoal, yet utilization remains legal and acceptable and legitimate, even across the borders. In part of our project that we're doing in one of the counties in Kenya, which is Kitui, that actually banned charcoal trade outside the borders of the county in 2018, and only said you can only produce for domestic and sell 3 bags. So across the roads, you'll find 3 bags piled. They can actually be belonging to one person, but I don't know. All those 3 bags piled because you are only allowed to put 3 bags on the road. And then when we interviewed traders in Nairobi to say, hey, now charcoal transportation is banned in Kenya. Where are you getting your charcoal? They said from Uganda. So we went to the border between Uganda and Kenya in Busia to actually look at the trucks coming in, record them coming in, interview the traders, and wow, yes, actually charcoal is coming from Uganda, and 85% of the traders were getting their charcoal through Uganda, from South Sudan, from DRC, as well as in Uganda. And just, I think, 5 weeks ago, I went to northern Uganda, and that's the picture I took. All that charcoal from northern Uganda being trucked and coming into Kampala, being repacked into Busia and so on, and getting into Nairobi. So that happens when the policies are not congruent or consistent across the borders, or when we keep a blind eye to say, ban charcoal production, but legalize use. Next slide, please. Sorry, in my previous slide, the other thing I wanted to show actually is that there is also charcoal moving into Cameroon from the Central African Republic, but also charcoal being exported into Chad from Cameroon. And Cameroon exports charcoal to Chad, but exports firewood to Nigeria because the law in Chad doesn't allow the import of wood, but in Nigeria, that is allowed. So you have all those inconsistencies as well. And then there is a lot of charcoal moving in and out of Zambia as well. I think up to 2013, 14, there was no charcoal in Zimbabwe, but 2015, it's everywhere. Where is it coming from? From Zambia. But Zambia has banned export of charcoal from Zambia. Next slide, please. So the thing is, charcoal is there to stay. What should we do about it when we talk about transition and net zero emissions? So we did a study to try and see whether we can actually improve and decarbonize charcoal production within one of the sites in Kenya. And the one challenge is really unsustainable feedstock. The way the wood is harvested, you find that you actually use 12 tons of wood just to produce 1 ton of charcoal. So all that wastage. So really having 15% recovery from most of the kilns. So we try to invest about $55 for the producers to improve their charcoal, traditional charcoal kilns by putting the cylinders and ovens so that you increase some aeration in there. And we discovered that by just putting that $55, you can increase yield of charcoal by 49%, and also reduce the emissions of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, methane by over 40%, just increasing. As you can see, the traditional way of production has lots of smoke as well, so you have lots of solid particulates there that affect health. Next slide, please. Therefore, what does this all mean? I think all we are saying to policymakers, to people making decisions out there, charcoal will remain a major energy source for many in sub-Saharan Africa in the coming decades. I don't know how urgent and how fast that transition is going to go, but it might remain a fallacy for many in sub-Saharan Africa. Unfortunately, the supply basins are really threatened, degraded, or already deforested, and across the borders as well, and we're saying this is calling for greater engagement of stakeholders at regional and continental level to inform policy and practice and sustainability of charcoal production and trade with broader forest agricultural landscape, not just looking at what is in the forest as the previous speakers have talked about. It really remains more urgent than ever. And transition to modern sources has remained elusive for many. Bans and elimination has not worked. Most households are staking, so even if I don't use charcoal 100%, I'll always have charcoal somewhere in my backyard. That's what is happening. Even if I have an electric cooker, a gas cooker, there is always a charcoal stove somewhere. So investment is required to reduce the proportion of wood fuels in the energy budget by developing and availing affordable and enduring alternatives, making energy transition not just sustainable, but just, especially for those poor in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you so much.
Posiso, thank you very much indeed. That was very, very direct, very, very blunt. I like the examples you used. I mean, people are getting their charcoal, etc., from across borders, even if it's banned in their country. And the legislation is simply not coherent or congruent with what's happening on the ground. And I like the example where you said people are not going to be eating salads. You know, in all these. I have to admit, I've been to Nigeria a few times. I don't think I had salad once. Cameroon, Congo, Zimbabwe, or Zambia, you said Chad. No, I really liked the examples you gave there. And decarbonizing charcoal production, but it's still charcoal production. So what can we do if the bans and the elimination is not working? And if this current transition at the moment appears to be a fallacy, certainly when it comes to people's lived experience on the ground. Well, what about the role of bioenergy, data reporting, and monitoring in this transition toward more modern and sustainable use of woody biomass in Africa. I've obviously got to go to Yaguba Traore, Head of Policy Strategy and Report and Support at the African Energy Commission of the African Union. Maybe, Yaguba, you can respond to some of this and talk about the key role of bioenergy, data reporting and monitoring. Over to you at the African Union.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Henry. Yes. So thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on wherever you are. The Africa Energy Commission is the specialized institution of the African Union, mandated to develop the energy sector in Africa. So among what we do is developing policies, strategies, in supporting the member state to develop the sector, but also, very importantly, to manage the energy data on the continent, the energy statistic, all the spectrum. And we have been working on that and having a special focus on the bioenergy. Next slide, please. Yeah. So according to the statistic that we have, the information that we gather from the member states, actually biofuel and waste represent around 430 million tons of oil equivalent, which is nearly the half of the total energy supply on the continent. But you'll see that the overall figure is here is masks some realities, because there are some differences between regions and also between countries. For example, this statistic represents like 75% in West Africa, Central Africa, and also East Africa. But it represents only 25% in Southern Africa and less than 10% in North Africa. So it means that the consumption of bioenergy in Africa depends on the region where we are living. West Africa and Central Africa are the most consumer of bioenergy share on the continent. Next slide, please. So in terms of solid biofuel consumption, this figure here shows that majority of solid biomass consumed on the continent is composed of firewood. Charcoal and agricultural residues represent a very, very small fraction of the total final consumption. Actually, if you see, this is due to the fact that firewood is highly consumed on the continent is mainly due to the fact that it is readily available fuel, if I can say like that. There's no processing needed for it to be used. So especially in rural areas, people use firewood more than actually charcoal. Even the charcoal that are produced in rural areas are mainly used for selling in urban centers. So the firewood that is used actually have some consequences because women and children normally travel some distances to be able to get this firewood. Next slide, please. In terms of sectors that use the firewood, most of the consumption occurred in household actually. However, there has been additional data that Africa collects from member states will help to achieve a much greater understanding of the situation, especially the user in the business sector. So it is estimated that around 3 million people, actually 3 billion people, will still be using this traditional way of cooking. And in Africa alone, it's estimated to be will be having up to 9 million people who will be using this traditional way of cooking. So that's why Africa and African Union are also looking at improving the cooking methodology by promoting clean cooking technologies. Next slide, please. Actually, this will be the last slide. If we see in most of the countries, there are a very big lack of data on the whole spectrum of information that are needed to properly cover the bioenergy situation in the country. Data on bioenergy consumptions is a result of surveys that are carried out for that date more than 10 or 20 years, depending on the countries. So even those all that data provide only a very partial picture of the bioenergy situation, with little information on cross-cutting issues such as health, employment, and also other socio-economic development aspects. So in many countries, data collection is still met with several issues, including inadequate institutional framework among different stakeholders, among the agriculture department, department in charge of forestry, and also department in charge of energy. There's also a lack of human and financial resources. So the bioenergy statistic management in most of the African countries is not also considered as a key important sector, even though the bioenergy represents like 50% of the total energy consumption in Africa. So that's why African Union, through the Africa Energy Commission, has been working with the mandate from our head of states to really put some emphasis on the bioenergy reporting. That's why last year, with our partner, Global Bioenergy Partnership, we developed a kind of strategic framework for a sustainable management of bioenergy data on the continent. And through that framework, we provide guidelines to member states on how to improve the bioenergy situation on the continent. And this year, we are supporting the Mozambique Ministry of Energy. Actually, we are currently carrying out a bioenergy survey on the continent to really understand, on the country, to understand the use of bioenergy, the use of bioenergy comparing to other sources of energy in the country. We hope that this study will come out by early September this year, and it will be available to all. And we also use the data that we have to produce some policy brief. The last one that we produce is really to try to understand whether the biomass will still continue to fuel the Africa as source of energy. So with that, Mr. Hari, I submit, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yaguba, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Yaguba, Head of Policy Strategy and Support, the African Energy Commission. Again, very, very frank about the gaps, the shortcomings, and what's required, especially data on health and employment and socioeconomic impacts there. And well, we've talked a lot about the use of firewood and charcoal across various African countries and borders. And yeah, I mean, it's very, very frank, and it gives a sense of the scale of what will be required for a just and sustainable transition. Well, let's look at a case of, finally, for now, of industrialized countries, the policies and strategies on modern use of wood energy as opposed to traditional. And I'm delighted that we've got Toshimasa Masuyama, who's an advisor, forests and climate, at the Forestry Agency in the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry and Fishery of Japan. Over to you, Toshimasa.
Thank you, moderator. First of all, I'm sorry, I was not prepared to provide beautiful green backgrounds like other panelists.
Well, you're in Tokyo. Maybe there's no green there. I don't know.
No,
I'm sure there is. There must be green there.
Indeed, I'm in Tokyo. Yeah, but anyway, so thank you very much for organizers for having me here, although I couldn't join this event in person. So next slide, please. So my aim is today shares with you some experiences in Japan. So next slide, please. Yeah, let me start with the historical trend of wood supply in Japan. As you can see, even in Japan, traditional use of biomass was prevalent in 1950s and 60s, but all those traditional uses almost dwindled away during the period of rapid economic growth. And then the recent decades saw a new surge of fuel. In fact, this is literally fueled by the feed-in tariff system, which came into effect in 2012. And next slide, please. So local villagers are carrying firewood on the back. This photo was taken around 1950 in Fukushima in Japan. Worth noting is that only a handful of tall trees can be seen with the rest of the forest floor is covered by low bushes. In fact, this kind of scenery is unfamiliar these days. So next slide, please. I'll tell you why. Next slide. Yes. Go back the previous slide. Yes. What I want to point out in the context of today's discussion is that it became unnecessary for local villagers to use their background forest as a source of energy, mainly because in Japan, the direct use of oil or electricity become universally accessible. So this kind of tradition made it possible to significantly lower the pressure of overexploitation and resulting in the former coppice forests giving way to purpose-grown planted forests, mainly for industrial roundwood production. Consequently, the growing stock of forests almost tripled in the last 50 years, with the planted forests driving such growth. And as you can see on the left, the present forest looks completely different from what it was half a century ago. And next slide, please. So let me just briefly explain the current surge of firewood in Japan. As forest resources matured, the forest policies shifted its focus on strengthening wood supply chains and expanding wood demand. So the introduction of feed-in tariff completely matched the need of forest policy objectives because much of the thin trees were left on the forest ground without being transported, without providing any economic value. So the impact of the feed-in tariff was tremendous. So as you can see on the map, many biomass power plants have been newly developed since the introduction of feed-in tariff, and many more in the pipeline actually. And Japan has the 7th largest installed capacity of solid biomass power, according to IRENA's database. Next slide, please. So, however, it is important to note that field supply for modern bioenergy cannot grow by its own because the feedstock for bioenergy is generated from trees of the lowest grade. In Japan, the firewood is called grade D in business transactions. So the feedstock supply can only be feasible when trees are harvested for grade A and B for material use. In other words, target setting of wood biomass is constrained by the supply potential of material wood. Otherwise, it may risk distorting the wood distribution. So the most suitable feedstock for bioenergy includes not only grade D logs, but also processing residues and recycled material produced at the end of the life cycle. However, competition for feedstock may arise as new technologies to combat such residue streams into more valuable products are gaining business attraction, especially for functional materials in the chemical sector. In Japan, high value-added products made from lightweight, high-strength cellulose nanofibers, as well as processable glycolignin have been developed. So next slide, please. Yeah, this is the end of my presentation. So in summary, so forest carbon stocks started to grow when people were freed from the burden of collecting firewood, and it has reached all-time high throughout the history of Japan. This is perhaps thanks to fossil fuel dividend. Now, the challenge we are facing is how to manage forests sustainably while aiming to resolve a dilemma of making full use of wood resources and phasing out of coal and oil. Residues and byproducts generated through the wood supply chains can be possibly used to generate renewable heat and electricity. At the same time, those have also functional properties that can be used as feedstock in the production of value-added products, such as chemicals and fibers. As the forest industry's portfolio expands, it becomes essential that the concept of climate-smart forestry that integrates carbon removals by forests, carbon storage and material substitution by wood products, and fossil fuel substitution by wood bioenergy should be core part of national climate and carbon neutrality strategy, thus complementing renewables and electrification. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Toshimasa. And you'll be pleased to know that during your presentation, as during the presentations of our previous speakers, everybody was nodding or taking lots of notes or doing screenshots, taking pictures of your slides. So I hope they haven't been copyrighted, okay? Because everybody's very, very keen to learn lessons and take away some really good data and good material from this session. We've got another 15 minutes left, and I'm conscious that some of you will have questions to ask. But before I hand over to you, and there are microphones dotted around the room, Thais, I'm just wondering, because you were scribbling even more furiously than I was, and I'm wondering what you make of the tension between the desire to transition away from, the traditional use of biomass, traditional use of firewood, etc., as described by Posiso and Yaguba, for example, to the future described by Annette, Maria, and Toshimasa. What do you make of that tension and the possible ways in which they might be able to, we might be able to resolve them? Big question, brief answer.
Well, thank you, Henry, and thank you very much for these excellent presentations. I think we have a very good picture of the different dimensions of bioenergy in Africa. And I think that bioenergy, as we have seen here, is the invisible reality, meaning if we look at the data, it does not exist. So basically, it's very difficult to formulate policy. It's very difficult to trigger investments, mobilize resources to something that does not exist in the numbers. And this is one of the main challenges that we have, because unfortunately, forest products in Africa, the statistics are weak across all the value chain. So this is a problem. So Africa is one of the main wood producers, but we have no statistics. When it comes to bioenergy, it's even more difficult because we have a situation when bioenergy, the sector is energy, but it comes from forests. So the energy authorities, they not always see the forest side. They do not always see that charcoal is actually part of their portfolio. And it makes the whole situation even more complex. So for us, there's not only this, but the charcoal, as we have seen here, is not a forest issue. It's a development issue. It's at the core of food security. It's at the core of livelihoods. It generates revenues. It generates health issues. It has a lot of, consequences associated to that are developmental issues, and we need to address them. So I think that the partnership that we have, it's a good beginning. There are recent efforts to improve data. I must say that very recently, FAO in collaboration with the Global Strategy for for agricultural information, has developed a survey to collect data on bioenergy. So now we have an instrument to collect data. We now need to be able to work with governments to have this data collected. But we have a methodology, and we have a way of harmonizing this approach. I think that also, because of the discussions we're having on climate neutrality, because of the degradation, because of restoration, because there is a linkage between charcoal and restoration that was mentioned here, and we can use restoration also to help to make this transition to sustainable bioenergy. So there are many things that bring us opportunities to improve the picture that we have seen here. And more than that, I think that it's now very clear that, as someone said, the charcoal, the bioenergy, the wood fuel is something that will stay with us for a long time.
Yes.
So we need to work on this and to be able to make policies to really transform the situation.
Lacey, thank you very much for that response. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3 mics in the center, 4 mics across the room. I'm just looking for somebody who wants to make use of one of these mics, who has listened, thought, and now wants to ask a question or make a brief comment. I'm looking at all of you, and I see a sea of blank faces with masks on them. Because if you don't yes, please. Tell us who you are and whom you want to address your question to.
Hey, yeah, my name is Artes. I come from Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences.
Yep.
Thank you for nice presentations. Really enjoyed this session. Yeah. Nicely moderated session as well. Thank you. In Sweden, we have a long history of use of charcoal in the past, and to the transition to the urbanization, it just stopped.
Yes.
But we still embrace it, and we still find our charcoal pits in our forest, and we still protect them as our historical value. And it's because I draw 2 parallels from your presentation about the charcoal use. First is create the same cripple system as ivory trading, because it's not allowed, but it's still happening. And because mammoth tusk mining and permafrost is still allowed. And second thing is cannabis, which is not allowed, but now some countries transit into the controlled grow and certified farming of cannabis. Could it help if there would be some kind of alliance which allowed to use and build sufficient industry for charcoal producers? And I understand that for many farmers, it's a stream of incomes to build a charcoal, but it's not very healthy business to be. But if you create collaborations or cooperatives of the farmers, like hungry farmers together, build one big plant,
yes,
and subsidized by European Union or whatever, and then produce it more efficiently.
Right,
can,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Atis. Thank you very much for that question. And then over there, yes, you have a question, and tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Lacey, and I am a forester from Canada. Yeah. I'm happy to go after the Swede, who we look at with envy from Canada in the bioenergy front. So I'm just wondering, we're a country who has an abundance of unused wood material. It's kind of a different situation in that no one's really buying into the bioenergy market as a solution to our addiction to non-renewable fuel sources. So I'm just wondering if there's any conversations going on about how to expand the use of bioenergy in the oil and gas hungry and overusing countries.
Thank you very much, Lacey. You said that with great sorrow. And then behind you, yes?
Yep, thank you. Justinas Janulaitis from Preferred by Nature. Basically, I wanted to make a comment and maybe ask a question.
Make it brief, that's fine, yes.
I'll try. So recent Russian war against Ukraine is really changing the landscape of the whole energy flows within the world, where we hear about EU coming up with probably new sanctions by banning the fossil fuels from Russia. And in the same time, there's also already existing sanctions from EU for the imports of the biomass for the energy production. So basically, how do you see that? Well, definitely that's going to change the energy flows where more biomass will be needed from all around the world. There's a good chance for the green energy to start growing. And more than that, you see a big of a challenge where the sustainability might be compromised because of such a huge need of the huge energy resources within a very short period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. And your name again is?
Justinas.
Justinas. Thank you very much. Okay, well, let's start off with the question about, I'm going to go to the Canada question first. I quite liked that one. So oil and gas, hungry countries like Canada, lots of unused wood material. Who wants to take that? Let me have a look. Annette, would you like to take that question?
It's a challenge that we're facing in Australia at the moment because we certainly don't have the same luxury as Canada with a large amount of unused forestry residues. It's an interesting comment that Jacopo has made in the chat. Is to suggest that wood and forests are never unused. They might be part of a healthy ecosystem. Certainly, if forestry residues are left on the forest floor, they can be important for sustaining fertility, providing nutrients and for sustaining biodiversity. But in Australia, most of our forestry residues are actually heaped in a pile and then burned to manage wildfire. So to me, this is really unused and wasted biomass that could be much more usefully used for energy to displace the large mountains of coal that is our major energy supply in Australia. So, but we have a major challenge with a public perception that wood fuel is not modern, that it's dirty, and that it has negative climate impacts. And so we need to do a much better job of making sure our wood supplies are sustainable, that we have good clean facilities with good gas cleanup to make sure we're not causing pollution. And we need to explain how forestry fits into the story of energy transition. So we have some nice studies in Australia demonstrating that if you have bioenergy in the mix of renewables, it reduces the levelized cost of electricity because you don't need so much spare capacity for wind and solar if you have some bioenergy to plug the gaps when the sun's not shining and the wind isn't blowing.
Okay.
So I think these are really important messages, how bioenergy can be used strategically in the energy transition.
Thank you very much for that, Annette. Michaela, Maria, I could see you nodding there. Do you want to take, you may have a quick reflection on that question, but I'd like to spend a little bit more time on the question that came from the gentleman over there on the European Union's seemingly contrary situation. So on the one hand, trying to ban oil and gas imports from Russia. At the same time, we've got the ban on imports of biomass. What about that position and what opportunities for green energy, given what the European Union and other larger entities are deciding to do at the moment?
Thank you. Indeed. Thank you very much. Well, I would like to focus on that question regarding energy security. And I strongly believe that energy diversification, which implies a higher and stronger consideration of bioenergy potentials in Europe, but all over the world, is key. Because so far, bioenergy has been considered as the less appealing form of renewable energy with respect to other sources of renewable energy. I'm thinking about solar, wind, but now the current situation of energy security, that's the case in Europe, has brought us not as specialist experts, because of course we know since many, many years, but has opened the eyes even of public perception and policymakers in Europe and all over the world, that energy security is key. Energy diversification is a tool to guarantee energy security, and therefore bioenergy has a role to play. And in addition to this, I wouldn't agree with the idea that sustainability is at risk. I mean, of course, it could be, because in order to have energy quick and dirty, we may tend to risk to put in at risk sustainability. But it's important that this doesn't happen, in the sense that we have a lot of potentials of bioenergy production in Europe and all over the world. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of cleverly looking at bioenergy potentials that could be produced in a sustainable manner, and look at that. Allow me to make just one case. For example, briefly, biogas. Yeah. Yes, sure. Biogas, just to make one example. We have high, strong potentials of biogas production in Europe that even just for the country of Italy, just to make an example, could potentially substitute, let's say, 1/10 of the import of natural gas from Russia. So this is that to say that bits and pieces all together, all the energy, renewable energy sources could contribute to energy security in a sustainable manner. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Maria, for that. We're slightly over our time, but I think I'm going to extend by 5 minutes. Is that okay? People happy to stay for 5 more minutes? Is that okay? Yeah, I think people are. That's okay. Fantastic. Thumbs up. Was it Attis from Sweden? He was making comparisons which surprised me between ivory and cannabis, and then he talked about an alliance. Maybe the charcoal producers getting together to be more efficient, more sustainable. Posiso, any thoughts on that at all? You're smiling already.
Yeah, because there is this dichotomy. Charcoal production and use in Europe is clean. Yeah, when it's used there, it's clean. In barbecues and so on, it's clean. But when it's produced and used in Africa, it's not clean. And that is true. You find that even the bags of charcoal I showed you, they do find themselves in the barbecues in Europe. Now it's clean. And it's about the technology. Yes. The technology in the production and in the utilization. So the clean access to the clean cooking is really a key thing. That's one point I wanted to make about the dichotomy. But the biggest issue is governance. And the virus for governance is corruption. Yeah. So Kenya has one of the best charcoal rules. Zambia just put in one last month. Cameroon has a licensing system. DRC has a licensing system. Uganda has a way of managing production and use of charcoal, and how charcoal producers organize themselves and get licensed and get support in actually having efficient kilns that they actually are supported to put in by various projects. But what happens? Big traders, invisible barons, are deforesting forests. That's why we had a ban in Kenya. It was these people who go by night or by day, subcontract, because they are poor, that's the only way of livelihood they have, to cut down even gazetted forests and then produce charcoal in mass. They are very difficult to manage because they pay and bribe and grease their way through the system, and that's why in the end, even if you have the best licensing system, you have a governance system in place, but corruption is just collapsing everything.
Posiso, thank you very much for that very sober reflection. Let's get a couple of closing reflections from the rest of our panelists, briefly, if you will. Yaguba, you can respond to what Posiso has just said or anything else you've heard as part of your closing thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. I think the thing is that, yes, we need to understand what is going on here in the bioenergy sector, but at the same time, we need also to modernize the system in Africa in terms of the production technology, but also the way this bioenergy is used in Africa. The fact is that Africa, especially the sub-Saharan Africa, will be continue using the bioenergy as main source of energy. So we just need to modernize the sector and also to improve the technologies so that we avoid some of the bad effect of its use on the continent.
Thank you very much for that, Yaguba. Final thoughts from Toshimasa, over in ungreen Tokyo.
Thank you. Just briefly, time is running. Yeah, I'm very conscious about the issue of charcoal because I used to live in Kenya for 3 years. So charcoal can be clean or dirty depending on where they are produced. But I think what is lacking in this kind of discussion is what should be the alternative. In case of Japan, it was carbon-intensive energy that replaced charcoal. But in case of Africa, for example, I think there are many more potential taking advantage of, for example, off-grid or mini-grid solar power system to replace traditional unsustainable practices. Then I think it can open up the possibility of repurposing local food wood resources for more high value-added products, for example, to substitute plastics, for example. Yeah, that's my final reflection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I want to thank our panelists. They've been tremendous. Thais on my immediate left, Posiso, on my far left, Yaguba, Toshimasa, Maria, and Annette. You've covered a broad range of aspects of this debate. You've been a great audience. You've been very, very engaged, and we could have had lots more questions. So thank you very much for that. Before I send everybody away, we have a very short 2-minute video which will sum up the essence of this discussion. Please run the video. Thank you very much. Just 2 minutes long. The tech team are looking at each other. Can we have the video? Yes. Video from the Global Bioenergy Partnership. Thank you very much. This session is closed. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great presentation.